Boker Tov, good morning, everybody. We are now moving along. Perek Hay, the fifth chapter in Or Teshuvah Lights of Return of Rav Kook, and we are on the subsection in the fifth chapter of the fifth subsection. So let's read it in Hebrew. We did half of it, and then we'll do the other half of it today. It happens to be, technically speaking, one long run-on sentence, the whole thing. Hakshanut lamot tamid b'dei achat. Which here we are. So Perek Hay, subsection Hay. So 5:5. Hakshanut lamot tamid b'dei achat. The stubbornness to stand always in one viewpoint, litamech ba, and to be supported in it. The chevlei hachatat shenasu l'minhag, in the cables of sin that have become one's accustomed behavior, bein b'masim, bein b'deot, whether we're talking about actions, whether we're talking about the way one views the world. This is a sickness which comes about through a deep submergence in a terrible slavery, which does not allow for the light of freedom, of tshuva, of return, to shine in all of its essential strength. For tshuva, for repentance, for return, it strives for the most essential freedom, most essential and authentic freedom, which is divine freedom, which has no slavery associated with it, no enslavement associated with it. Okay, what's this all about? So we had said last time that the way human beings work, and it's actually from a psychobiological point of view, absolutely true. We have this thing called neuroplasticity. The way our minds work, there's a certain fluidity and flexibility, thank you, of the way our nervous system operates. And when we do something once and then do it again and then do it again, we actually, as it were, kind of build circuitry. That's how addiction occurs, that we build a certain type of circuitry. Every time you do something, it makes it easier to do it again. So you can almost look at it, let's say you have water flowing, let's say through a plane. The water just scatters all over the place, right? But let's say you dig a canal. It's a little bit, not so deep, but just a little bit of a canal. So the water will tend to flow towards this little indentation that you're digging, and then you dig it deeper, and then the water flows more, and then every time the water flows more into that canal and makes it even deeper, through erosion of the water. So then the water always flows through that canal very easily, right, without any resistance whatsoever. That's the way we're built, right? And that's why that our sages tell us when you do a sin the first time, right? So we have pangs of conscience over it. You do it a second time, less pangs of conscience. The third time you do it, there's no pangs of conscience. The fourth time is a mitzvah, right? Yeah, it's a good deed. That was good. There you go. So the dark sages do tell us if we repent out of love, those transgressions really do become mitzvahs. But in any case, so that's what Rav Kook is saying here, that this kind of entanglement with these negative behaviors becomes minhag. It becomes a kind of, that's my custom. Right? We become accustomed and entrenched in certain ways of behaving. The other point here that Rav Avinger says is that the language actually comes from a pasuk in Mishlei. We pointed this out last time, where the pasuk, the way the sages understood it, compares, using a similar idea, that the difference between a spider's web, the fibers fibers of a spider web versus a steel cable,
Right.
right? So when we do things at first, our attachment to it is not that strong. It's like a spider's web, very vulnerable and flimsy. And that's the first time we do a sin. By the time we do it a few times, we're entrenched in that sin with the power of a hevel, and we translate it kind of a more modern sense of a steel cable. Right? That's the nature of sin. Okay. Now, the second theme that now we're touching on new, and we'll finish off the chapter now, is Rav Kook talks about that this process when things become, when a person is attached to sin with a steel cable, right? When it becomes minhag, a custom behavior, the circuitry in one's body has become acclimated to it, where it becomes the easiest thing, reflexive. Okay, so that is an avdut kasha. Rav Kook says it's a terrible slavery. We're almost at Pesach. Next week is Purim, then it's Pesach. Okay, so that's the idea of freedom from slavery. So a slave doesn't necessarily mean there's some guy who steals you and makes you into a slave, right? That is a type of slavery, but there can be a worse slavery. That is the slavery to oneself. The only problem is that Rav Kook says that the reason it's slavery is because it's not really slavery to oneself. Slavery means that when I am behaving in a way which is being coerced, which is not my authentic will, right? So I would rather go to work selling life insurance, but a person made me, whatever, a slave. I have to build a pyramid. Okay, that's slavery, right? I can't do what I want to. So Rav Kook says that what a person really wants to do is the divine will. That's what we really want to do. We may not know it, but we do.
That wants us to do it.
Exactly. That's that divine point within us, that pintaligid, that essential divine spark within us. It just wants to do what Hashem wants. That's our true will, and you can feel it. If we haven't been completely corrupted, which sometimes we have been, but we haven't been completely corrupted, you can feel it. You do something positive. You get this good feeling.
When that happens, doesn't that makes the Yetzer Hara even stronger to want to fight?
Well, so that's true sometimes that, we have it's not always easy to be free, right? Freedom comes with vigilance and struggle. And it's true politically and it's true spiritually. Okay, that's absolutely an important point. So that's absolutely true. That's the way the world is built. In any case, just the point I wanted to talk about a little bit more is the notion of how Rav Kook's understanding the term freedom. So the ultimate freedom is when we are able to express our most authentic desires, our most authentic will. This is our most authentic will, is to serve Hashem. So when we behave in ways which are alien to our most authentic will of serving Hashem, that's enslavement. And Rav Kook uses these terms that it's the most it's avdut kasha, right? It's a most painful and terrible enslavement. Why? Because see, if the Egyptians are making me into a Hebrew slave, right? Okay, so Egyptians come and go, and there are slave rebellions, and circumstances can change. But what happened if I enslave myself? That's a little bit harder. That's a little come and go, exactly. That's a little bit harder to. It's a lot harder to break away from that type of slavery. And so that is this avdut kasha, this terrible slavery. And what happens is that avdut kasha, then Rav Kook says, does not allow for the light of freedom to shine within us. And that light of freedom is that divine light, right? And we behave in a way which is in line with Hashem's will. That's the ultimate freedom, okay, which has no hint of slavery whatsoever. There's just one more point I want to make, and then we're going to go on to the next chapter. And there's a Rav Kook called this a sickness. He machala, word choleh, like right, make mishaber for cholim. So he calls it a sickness. What's very interesting about this, it has so many different aspects. There's one of the aspects is, and we have somebody here who's a professional expert in this area, not from personal experience, but a professional expert in terms of addiction. So there was always a big debate, and I think until this day, to a certain extent, is addiction only when it's something, chemical, right? Some kind of external thing, right? So people recognize, obviously, a heroin addict, right? Or an alcohol addiction. But what about things called, behavioral addictions or process addictions is kind of the fancy term, which I learned from Dr. Koff over there. So how do we deal with those kind of things? Gambling, pornography, shopping is amazing. There's all kinds of addictions. It could be an inability to control one's speech. So it could be. So in any case, I think there was a big revolution, and there was an attempt for many, many years, really coming from Alcoholics Anonymous, from that kind of school of thought, which said, just like we can view alcoholism, it was an attempt at trying to say alcoholism is a sickness. Of course, people said, that's not a sickness, that's a moral failure, right? That was the whole thing. Like, is addiction a moral failure, or is it a sickness? Okay, it's a disease. So it's interesting that Rav Kook here, writing so long ago, right? Who's writing, more than 100 years ago.
When did he die? 35.
1935, but this was one of the earliest works.
Well, that's when AA started, was 35.
Yeah, it was written way before that. Then Rav Kook is saying that this kind of slavery, this kind of addiction to negative behaviors which are self-destructive and destructive to others, he calls it a machala. It's a sickness. And he talks about why, what happened, how the process of addiction, of developing these neural pathways, like we talked about before, you actually kind of create a kind of a circuitry. But one more point I wanted to make about sickness. So this is the point Rav Aviner makes. It's a beautiful idea. So you can have something that happens to you which interrupts one's normal physiological functioning, but you call it a sickness or not. So the example he gives, you get a splinter in your finger. So it hurts, okay, but you're not sick. And then they call it sickness. What is sickness? Sickness is something which is a state of being which is impacting the entire being. It's a systemic negative impact, right? A splinter in your finger is a pain in your finger. You wouldn't say I have a pain on my finger, I'm sick. But if you're laying in bed because you have a terrible case of the flu, whatever it may be, so that's called sick. So what Rav Kook is suggesting here is this is the process of sin, that it starts out as a splinter in your finger, right? It's localized, right? You could, take out the splinter. But what happens is that at a certain point it becomes a machala, systemic, right? That the whole body is infected and made dysfunctional through the repetition of sin, to where it becomes, as it were, a custom. Okay, great. So let's spend a few more minutes and we'll go on to the next chapter. Ready? Chapter Vav. Okay, chapter 6. מבלעדי מחשבת התשובה, מנוחתה וביטחונה, לא יוכל אדם למצוא מנוח, והחיים הרוחניים לא יוכלו להתפתח בעולם. Okay. If a person does not engage in the thought of tshuva, in the restfulness and tranquility that tshuva gives, in the confidence and security that tshuva gives, that return gives, a person can never find the rest and the spiritual life can never develop in the world. Okay. You know, there is an expression which our sages use when a person wants to become pure. So they're in a state of ritual impurity, tuma. Okay, so there are certain ways that one comes out of tuma. And the sort of the culmination of the process of becoming tahor, of becoming spiritually pure, is through a mikveh. A mikveh. Okay? So the waters of a ritual bath, a mikveh. Okay. Now, one of the ways that was relevant in nowadays, we don't, it's not practically relevant. When the Mashiach comes and the Holy Temple is rebuilt, it'll become relevant again. But one of the ways when the temple was here, the Holy Temple, and the laws of purity and impurity were in full force. So coming in contact with, let's say, a creepy crawly creature, okay? So that communicates tum'ah, impurity. So what if a person, our sage just said, he wants to become pure, right? He came in contact with sheretz. Sheretz is the Hebrew term for this creepy crawly thing. So he goes to the mikveh while holding on to the creepy crawly thing.
It's really
Yeah. Yeah, that's the image that our sages use. Okay, Atovel b'sheretz biyado, right? The first, I'm sorry, she goes to the mikveh with a creepy crawly in her hand. Yes, I'm sorry.
Rabbi Yonah, people that it's in the Machzor.
Yeah, Rabbeinu Yonah. Very good. Very good, Larry. Yeah. So obviously, you go to the mikveh, you think, well, I'm becoming pure. But you're holding a creepy crawly thing. It's not going to help very much, right? How can you become pure if the abominable thing is in your hand?
It's a hulk.
So Rav Kook is saying that when a person wants to develop spiritually, so it can't happen without teshuvah. And furthermore, Rav Kook says that lipater olam, that for tshuva to develop in the world, it has to be coming by tshuva. But tshuva is not something like I can define a very specific sin that I did, and I'm going to do teshuva over that specific sin. Now I've overcome that obstacle, and now I'll go to Minyan and learn Daf Yomi, the page of Talmud a day, and I'm on easy street spiritually. It's not the way it works. That teshuva has to be a constant part of our spiritual life. There's no end to it. There's no end to it. And because there's all kinds of aspects in which teshuvah has to take place, whether it's addressing very specific and discrete negative behaviors or simply growing. Growing is also teshuvah, right? Growing spiritually. To the extent that we're not perfect, we're imperfect. And those imperfections require constant addressing. Now, there's one more aspect of this, and that is that Rav Kook has this very, very powerful notion, which also is so resonant with contemporary ways of thinking on a psychological level. So Rav Kook says, machshevet hatshuva, the thought of tshuva, as a form of tshuva which has this purifying impact. Now just think about that for a second. What does machshevet hatshuva, the thought of tshuva, mean? He's saying that it must be as opposed to what?
Not the good ones.
Going to the emotions.
Actually doing tshuva, right? Right, that's what you said. Right.
So it's basically like praying. You can't just think about the Amidah. You have to speak the Amidah.
Well, what's interesting is Rav Kook says that both are true. What would happen if you were praying, but your brain wasn't there? That's not worth much, right? And of course, that's what we do because we daven 3 times a day. We get used to it, and then we just utter words. So just like the actions require the mental engagement, Rav Kook saying something very radical. What happens if you have the mental engagement but not yet the action? So we would tend to say, well, that's worthless. Good intentions are nice, but it stops short of the real thing. Rav Kook says it's not true. That machshevet tshuva, that even the thought of tshuva is a very, very powerful, purifying force. Rav Kook actually proves this from the Torah itself, because the Torah itself, when it talks about teshuvah, it has a long paragraph in the Torah, and it's in the paragraph has two ways of talking about teshuvah. V'shavta ad Hashem Elokecha, you shall return to the Lord your God. Right? V'shavta ad Hashem Elokecha, and then it also says ki tashuva el Hashem Elokecha, you shall return to the Lord your God. So they're both very similar phrases. V'shavta ad Hashem Elokecha, you shall return to the Lord your God. Ki tashuva el Hashem Elokecha, you'll return to the Lord your God. But if you listen carefully to what I just said, there are two different words that are used to refer to God. One says El Hashem Elokecha, one says Ad Hashem Elokecha. So let's see if we get our Hebrew experts here. So the difference between Ad Hashem and El Hashem. So Rav Kook explains, the Malbim says the same thing. So Ad means towards, and El means to. Okay. So Ad means moving in the direction, and El means arriving. So Rav Kook says, look at the Torah commanding us to engage in a tshuva of towards. That's what he says is machshevet tshuva.
Right. Think about it.
That even if somehow we haven't conquered the problem, but it's something that occupies us and something that even breaks our heart, but we haven't quite succeeded, the struggle itself, which is emotional and intellectual, that itself is a form of tshuva, as the Torah says. Ki tashuv el Hashem Elokecha, you return to, but also v'shavta ad Hashem Elokecha, you should return towards. That's a mitzvah to return towards, even if it hasn't expressed itself in ultimate fruition.
Because it can cause us to take action if we think about it enough.
That's true. Without that thought, nothing's going to happen, right? And the thought itself has a purifying factor. Every time you do a mitzvah, it's purifying. So if the Torah says, V'shavta ad Hashem Elokecha, you shall return, it's a commandment. V'shavta, you shall return ad Hashem Elokecha, towards the Lord your God. That means you're fulfilling the mitzvah of tshuva ad, the tshuva of the aspect of tshuva, which is towards. And when you do a mitzvah, you feel good, and you feel that purifying force. When you do a tshuva itself, it's like a mikvah. It's like a spiritual mikvah was going into. So even if one is brokenhearted because one wasn't successful, you should feel like you went into a partial mikvah. Right? That itself, it has a certain purifying force, not totally. It's not towards. It's not to. It's only towards. But that will empower you to move to the next step. Let's pause there. We'll continue Bezrat Hashem next week. Have a great day, everybody.